Hi everyone. Welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. I'm tired. I don't understand how long this can go on and what am I waiting for. I really loved him. I loved him with all my heart. Yes, I was too young a girl then, when we got married, when we stood in front of the altar and his parents be damned. When I swore before God that I would love him forever and only heaven would part us. Why can't I take it back? Do I have to torture myself day in and day out just because I made those promises? I haven't loved him for a long time, just like he doesn't love me. He only loves himself, his parents, and our children. But who will love me? In these moments of despondency, I feel that even God has turned his back on me. How else could he have given me to this family for whom I am nothing, who only remember I exist when they need something? Summer, clean this up. Summer, take out the trash. Summer, damn it. Can you stop stomping your feet so loud? I'm sick of it. I have to tell Will everything. Take the kids and get out of this house. But who's gonna let me go, especially with the kids? Will's dad won't even let me leave the house. I hope I stay alive at least. This entry was made by Summer Inman in her personal diary, which she kept hidden from her husband and his parents. This diary, the one place where she could express her thoughts and not be afraid of being judged or even punished. 1983, Logan, Ohio. In a small American town of only 40,000 people, a new evangelical church called Tabernacle of Faith opens, which none of the residents had ever heard of before. The founder of the church, David Oyedepo, traveled to the town from Nigeria and told the congregation that he had an 18-hour meeting with God, during which the Almighty told him that it was time to free the world from the oppression of the devil through preaching and prayer. David Oyedepo was an extremely charismatic preacher, and that is why the Tabernacle of Faith Church became very popular in Logan. It was at this church that Bill and Sandra Inman met. Bill was already 18 years old at that time and played musical instruments at the church on Sundays. Sandra also attended church with her parents. Sandra recalls that the young musician parishioner very much liked her parents, and they did not hesitate to allow the young people to play a wedding. A year later, Bill and Sandra had a son, Will. According to family traditions, Will was born with his parents, went to church, and when he was 17 years old, then just like his father, met in the Tabernacle of Faith with a very young 15-year-old Summer Cook. Only with marriage young people were not in a hurry and waited until Summer was 18 years old. In 2004, after their wedding, Will's parents insisted that the young people lived with them. Summer did not like this idea, of course, but her husband was very dependent on his father and could not cross him, so she left her parents' house and moved into the house of the Inman family. That same year, another turning point in the Inman family's life occurs. Bill creates his own flock and remodels the family garage, formerly used as a workshop, into a self-proclaimed church. From Summer Inman's diary, Will's father has changed a lot. I literally don't recognize him. Tonight at family dinner, he told us that he hears the voice of God in his dreams, and that he wants to share this revelation with others for their own good. Will himself seems to realize that his father is becoming a religious fanatic. I've seen him roll his eyes, but what can he say against it? Yes, indeed, to some, like Summer, Bill Inman's idea may seem delusional, but locals came to his garage in droves, prayed, listened intently to their leaders' speeches, and even made donations. In 2005, Will and Summer had their firstborn son. They named him Alex, but right after the baby was born, everyone realized that their family was in huge financial trouble. The women were forbidden to work anywhere. They were obliged to do only household chores, and 4 adults and 1 infant cannot live only on donations from parishioners and on Will's rare part-time jobs. At a family council, Bill said they were moving to Florida. In Florida, Bill and Will did construction work while the women still stayed home and raised baby Alex. From Summer's diary, not much changed with the move to Florida. All day Will and his father disappear at work, and Sandra and I stay home with Alex all day and night. When is Will going to grow up and be on his own? I don't think I can wait for that. Having come to the conclusion that in Florida a lot of money cannot earn, Bill Inman decides to return to his native state. but because of non-payment of taxes, their house in Logan was taken away, and the court ruled a ban on its subsequent redemption. So they moved to a rented house in the countryside Vinton, which is not far from Logan. There, Summer also gives birth to 2 daughters, Kelly and Alana. From Summer's diary, we still don't have any money. Will wants me to have 12 children for him. I sometimes laugh in his face, which he takes offense to, and sometimes even stops talking to me. In 2010, Bill Inman, now officially the leader of Tabernacle of Faith Church, and together with his wife Sandra, they register a non-profit organization called Mercy Ranch. A bright idea is born in his head, to build on behalf of the church a home for orphans, widows, and the homeless. But naturally, there was no money for the idea. However, the new leader found a way out of this situation. He invented a lottery, according to which the winner will win $200,000, and the remaining 99 people will receive no less valuable prizes. The remaining funds would be used to build the house Bill dreamed of. Television and radio ads were run, and Bill himself even went door to door at first, asking residents to participate in the charity lottery. The result was stunning. Bill Inman managed to raise $1 million. The grand prize drawing was scheduled for September 2010, but as you may have guessed, no drawing took place in September. Just like it didn't take place in October or November, Bill Inman simply defrauded the people who trusted him, and he had no plans to return the money to anyone either. It is during this period that Will's father hires Adam Peters to take care of the landscaping on their property, as well as other household chores. Adam sees Summer all the time and begins to feel sympathy for her. What he doesn't realize is that Summer and Will are having a crisis in their relationship. Nevertheless, he does not give up and gives the young woman signs of attention. After a while, Summer filed for divorce. She took the children and went to her parents. There she got a job for the first time in her life, a cleaner at the bank. Unfortunately, because of her early marriage and constant confinement in the Inman home, she had no education and no work experience other than raising children, so Summer didn't expect to get a better paying job, but deep down she was glad even that, because for the first time in many years she felt independent and for the first time nobody told her anything. Despite her resentment toward Will, she didn't mind her father seeing the children as much as he saw fit. The children, in her opinion, needed their father as much as they needed their grandparents. Indeed, Bill Inman, despite his tyrannical character, treated the children very affectionately and caring. To deny this was foolish. One day in December 2010, a bailiff came to the Inman house and ordered the family to leave the house for non-payment of rent. Summer found out about it, and so she went over to the house to pick up all the things she hadn't had time to pack when she moved in with her parents. It was scary to show up at a house where she was now considered a traitor, so she called Adam to help her with the packing. When the Inman family saw that Summer had arrived with her new lover, they wouldn't let anyone in the house. They hurled all sorts of curses at them, and promised that all of Summer's belongings in the house would be burned in the backyard. Even the police couldn't help with the conflict, as Will attacked and even beat up a policeman who arrived, while Adam, who was shocked by what he had seen, shouted that he would find him and kill him. That same day, Summer decided to file a report against her husband. In it, she pointed out that Will had never been the same, that it wasn't until after the wedding that he became in complete control of her. Her calls, texts, emails, he even controlled her lunchtime and how much she needed to eat, how much time to spend in the shower, and how much time to be outdoors. Periodically, he even took her phone away from her, and Summer could be out of touch for a week, even with her own parents. He also admitted to her that he wanted to find a second wife, and without hiding from Summer, he registered on dating sites, where he posted intimate photos of himself and openly corresponded with other women. In her diary, Summer often wrote that she wanted to divorce Will, but was afraid. This fear was understandable. Will had warned her numerous times that if she divorced him, he would shoot her. The police took a statement from a frightened Summer, who had harbored the fear for so many years, and came to the Inman home again. When questioned, Will answered yes, he took his wife's phone away from her, but only so she wouldn't talk to her lover 24 hours a day. Yes, he watched her diet, but only because he cared about her health. His answers didn't seem credible to the police, and they forbade him to go near his ex-wife, and he also received a fine and probation for this behavior. The Inman family could not ignore such, as it seemed to them, abuse of their son, and they in turn wrote a response, but already on Adam Peters. In their statement, they pointed out that when he worked in their house, he showed an unhealthy interest in Summer's young children, and that the subsequent presence of children in his company could end badly. Their fictions, of course, were not confirmed. After that, the worst thing in Summer's life happened. Close to midnight, March 22, 2011, Summer was finishing her work at the bank, which is in the heart of Logan. The branch itself had closed by then, and all she had to do was clean up her workspace, dusting and taking out the trash. She'd texted Adam to tell him that she didn't have much time left, and that she'd be home soon. It was already 12 o'clock at night. Summer was late, although she had never been late before. Adam was beginning to get seriously worried. There was no telling what this might be up to. Peters decided to meet Summer. By then, the doors to the ward were locked. No lights were on in the windows, which meant Summer wasn't there. Adam walked around the building but didn't see anyone. So he went to the dumpsters where the young woman was hauling the trash bags that had accumulated all day. She wasn't there either, but near the bins he found Summer's things: her purse, her cell phone, and her red jacket, which was lying in the grass, a little farther away from her things. There was no time to hesitate. He immediately dialed the phone number of the police. The police arrived and did a search of the belongings, then knocked on the bank and interviewed the security guards, to which they said that Summer had gone home over an hour ago, and they hadn't seen her again. At the glow of the police car's lights, 3 people approached. As it turned out, they were witnesses to the kidnapping. The 2 women were out for an evening jog, and although it was already dark, they saw a white Ford drive up to the bank cleaner's house. 2 men in black masks get out and push the screaming woman into the back seat. At the woman's screams, another eyewitness ran up to the car and tried to save her, but the blonde woman behind the wheel sprayed him in the face with a gas can, and the guy fell down and the car with the kidnappers drove away. The women were without phones, so they immediately ran to the nearest police station, where they interrupted each other very emotionally and tried to recount what they had seen. The police officers on duty only laughed at their story, naively believing that the night runners had made it all up. Who would think of kidnapping a bank cleaner with garbage bags in her hands? But as it turned out, the story was now pure truth, and because of the slowness of the cops, it was now impossible to find Summer on a hot lead. Like I said before, Logan is a small town. That's why the news of Summer's abduction by 3 unidentified men spread through the town overnight. By morning, proactive citizens had organized into groups to search for the missing woman. They scoured parks, vacant lots, abandoned warehouses, but Summer was nowhere to be found. A week before she disappeared, Will Inman tried to contest his child support payments. According to the court order, he was supposed to pay $150 for each child, but since his monthly salary was only $500, he asked that the payment be reduced to $150 for the 3 children in total. Will also asked for full custody of his children, but this was denied by the court. Since Summer was not in contact with anyone because of her long reclusive life, the police suspicions fell only on the Inman family. They were found in the house of Bill's mother in a neighboring town. All 3 said that they had not heard anything about the disappearance, and on the day of the kidnapping they were in Cleveland, where they wanted to find a new home, but unfortunately they never got there, because their car broke down on the way, and worried that they could get stuck at night on a deserted highway until morning, they had to return to Logan. Besides, their past grudge against Adam resurfaced, and they began to blame everything on him. The car breakdown could neither be proven nor disproven, but during the interrogation, the police saw a white Ford in the yard, just like the one described by the witnesses to the kidnapping. At that time, a GPS receiver was taken from the car. During the inspection, it was determined that it had been turned off during the period of Summer's abduction. The police also decided to check the Inman family's cell phones, which revealed that the family had not left Logan that night. Police soon received additional information that at 7:30 a.m. the morning of Summer's disappearance, the white Ford had stopped by a car wash where all 3 of them, Bill, Sandra, and Will, were dry cleaning the interior. The whole family was detained and taken in for questioning. Bill, who was already being led away under the arms of the police, shouted to his elderly mother that they were not guilty of anything, that it was the work of the devil against whom he and his parishioners were fighting. At the police station, the Inmans, as if bewitched, repeated the same thing, and only when it became clear that they had no alibi and they were facing execution, Sandra took the blame. From Sandra Inman's testimony, kidnapping Summer was my idea. It was my idea, and I was driving the white Ford that night. Of course, neither of us planned to kill Summer. I swear it was an accident. On the night of March 22nd, we drove up to the bank where Summer worked and waited a long time for her to finally finish her shift. At about 11 p.m., we saw her near the garbage cans near the bank. I drove up to her, and my husband Bill and son Will, who hid their faces under black masks, pushed Summer into the car. Again, we had no intention of killing her. The only thing we wanted was for her to let us see the kids since we are family. Will, in an act of intimidation, tied Summer's hands and feet with plastic ties to keep her from running away. Apparently, one of the ties he tightened around her neck. He overestimated his strength, and Summer began to choke and her face began to turn red. Will wanted to cut the tie, but he couldn't find a knife, and the knife we were taking with us had gotten under my seat, and when he did find it, it was too late. Summer was dead. Sandra Inman showed the place where they hid Summer's body. It was an old well near the Tabernacle of Faith Church. Yes, the same church where Bill and Sandra had first met, and then Will and Summer, the church where both had gotten married and where they'd gone to pray and confess for years. The autopsy confirmed Sandra's words. Summer had indeed died of asphyxiation. No other injuries were found on her body. In 2012, the court sentenced Bill Inman and Will Inman to life in prison, and Sandra Inman, despite taking all the blame, also received a life sentence, but the court allowed her to request parole after 15 years. Why is that? Apparently because, according to relatives, the women in the Inman family never decided anything. The whole family obediently obeyed only Bill, and if it was someone's cruel plan to regain custody of the children, it was his. And Sandra took the blame to save her husband and son, but she never succeeded. Story 2. The discovery of Paige Bergfeld's car was the beginning of a mysterious story that began on the first Sunday of July 2007. On that day, a red Ford Focus that belonged to the missing Paige was discovered. However, the location where the car was found and its condition raised many questions and raised serious suspicions. The car was located in a remote area that Paige did not normally visit. Moreover, it was completely engulfed in flames of fire, suggesting that something terrible and strange had happened. The county district attorney of the county had been looking into what had happened with special scrutiny, and his preliminary findings indicated that the fire around the car was intentional. The conclusion was supported by the fact that nothing else had burned in the area. The unusual incident involving Paige Bergfeld's car was only the beginning of a much more complicated story. June 28, 2007 was a day that will always be remembered by Paige's family and friends. On this ordinary day, the young woman left her 3 children with friend Carol Linder home and left early in the morning. Nothing portended trouble, and no one could have imagined what would soon happen. Paige was a responsible mother and always called or came to pick up her children on time. Morning came, but Paige never returned to pick up her children. Attentive friends and relatives began trying to contact her, but all to no avail. 8-year-old Jez, the eldest of her children, took the initiative in searching for the missing woman. After sending several messages to her mom's phone and getting no response, she insisted on searching. With Carol, they went to the police station, where Jez reported that her mom had not returned for her. This call to the police was a key point in the beginning of the police investigation in search for Paige Bergfeld. With each passing hour, the concern of Paige's loved ones only grew. The community was shocked by this mysterious disappearance, and many were willing to make every effort to help in the search for Paige. Thus began a massive public search operation to return this young woman to her children and loved ones. That same day, the missing woman's father, Frank Bergfeld, received a disturbing call from an official with the sheriff's department. The message was brief and shocking. His daughter had disappeared. It became clear to Frank that something serious had happened. He tried to contact Paige, but there was no response. Terrified and desperate, Frank called his oldest son, Craig, who was on the other side of the country. Craig didn't hesitate to buy a one-way ticket and arrived in town, ready to help in the search for his sister. Family and loved ones joined forces with police and volunteers to begin a massive search. People from different neighborhoods began searching for Paige, combing the surrounding area, checking every corner where they could find any trace of her whereabouts. The police began scrutinizing Paige's history with her loved ones to see if they had anything to do with her disappearance. Of course, authorities turned their attention to Paige's relationship with her first husband, Howard Bigler. The story of that relationship began during her high school years. After graduating from high school, Paige enrolled in nursing school at the University of Florida, where she met a young man named Howard Bigler. Their feelings for each other proved to be mutual, and they began dating. After successfully earning her nursing degree, Paige returned to Colorado. There, she continued to live with her family, but after some time in 1995, she and Howard Bigler got married. At first glance, the spouses seemed to be a happy couple. They had many common interests and views on life. However, there was one significant rift in their relationship that eventually led to divorce. Paige dreamed of a child and wanted a family. However, Howard did not share her desire. The issue became a cause for arguments and conversations on numerous occasions. None of the attempts to find a compromise was not successful, and in 1997, the couple decided to part ways. Nevertheless, despite the divorce, their connection was strong, and the former spouses remained friends. Paige later married Rob Dixon, but their marriage also ended in divorce. After her divorce from Rob, Paige resumed communication with Howard. The missing woman's first husband claimed that he was one of the last people to see Paige alive. On the 28th, they met up in Eagle County, Colorado. It was due to personal business. There they spent Thursday together. The former spouses then returned to their respective cities. Howard confirmed that they continued to communicate by phone after the meeting. Also, upon learning of Paige's disappearance, Howard immediately contacted emergency services. While speaking to the operator, he expressed his deep concern and belief that something terrible had happened to Paige. He noted that she would never leave her children without a good reason. The phone recording was corroborated by cell tower data, showing that on the day Paige disappeared, Howard was in the Denver, Colorado area, which is several hours away from where she disappeared. This gave police officers reason to remove Howard from the list of suspects. Police began to scrupulously examine Paige's relationship with her second husband Rob Dixon and quickly uncovered many events that raised questions and warranted further investigation. It turned out that during their marriage, Paige had reported Rob to the police twice for harassment. After her divorce from her first husband, Paige took a job at a strip club in Denver, where she met Rob Dixon. The man was a wealthy man who had inherited a large fortune through his family's business. Having fallen in love with each other, Paige and Rob did not hesitate and in 1998 entered into marriage. The family settled in a luxurious home in Colorado, where Paige fulfilled her dream of becoming a mother. A few years later, the couple already had 3 children, which became for the young mom the most important thing in her life. The first years of marriage seemed happy. Paige and Rob were immersed in the world of luxury, leading a well-to-do lifestyle. Suddenly, however, things began to fall apart, and the reason for this was due to the financial difficulties Rob was facing. Some of his family's businesses had serious problems, and as a result, the economic situation in the family deteriorated so much that Rob was forced to file for bankruptcy. The financial collapse led to a deep family crisis. By 2004, family tensions had reached such a point that Paige contacted emergency services twice. The first time, she reported that Rob had threatened to kill her and the children, but by the time the police arrived, she and Rob claimed to have worked through their problems on their own. A year later, there was a second incident that was quite different. Paige reported Rob for assault, while claiming that he hit her while she was holding her youngest child. This time, Rob was arrested and charged with third-degree assault. He eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of molestation, but the trial was dismissed and Rob avoided jail time. The relationship between husband and wife was getting worse, and they decided to separate, after which Rob moved to Pennsylvania. Investigators interviewed Rob in an attempt to establish his alibi for the day Paige disappeared. Rob claimed that he was in his home and could not have harmed her. Ruling out his involvement in the disappearance, investigators could not. Rob eventually joined the search and was very active in trying to find Paige. Investigating officers spared no effort in an effort to find any clues to unravel this mysterious story and track down the missing mother. One of the first steps was a thorough examination of Paige's car. Based on the assumption that evidence could be found in the car that would help locate the woman, or at least understand what happened to her, Sergeant Weiler of the County Sheriff's Department said that arson is often used to destroy potential evidence. However, an examination of the vehicle provided experts with very valuable information. The driver's seat had been pushed back as far as it would go, indicating that the last person to drive the Ford was a tall man. Paige was short and couldn't have reached the pedals from that distance. In the trunk of the car, they found the missing woman's notebook, from which pages from June 26th through June 29th had been torn out. With each passing hour, the search for Paige grew more desperate. A few days after the burning car was discovered, a random driver stopped on a highway southeast of town for tire problems. A checkbook lying nearby caught his eye and he immediately reported it to the authorities. While investigating that stretch of road, medical records, insurance cards, and other items belonging to Paige were also found. Sergeant Weiler discovered that several pages in the checkbook had been torn out and the items were scattered a considerable distance apart. Most significant, however, was a business card found on the road. It became the key to revisiting the investigation. It turned out that Paige led a secret life that her loved ones had no idea about. According to the business card, the woman was an escort under the alias Carrie. This discovery called into question all previous assumptions in the investigation of Paige Bergfeld's disappearance. From that moment on, police officers were faced with new circumstances they had not even realized. After her divorce, Paige realized that from now on, she would have to work and earn as much as she could to provide for her children and meet their needs. She took a determined approach and started her own children's clothing business. At the same time, she taught dance lessons and sold kitchen supplies at a company. Despite her busy schedule, Paige always made time for her children, attended parent-teacher association meetings, and was active in school groups. A new discovery by the police turned the previous picture upside down. It turned out that Paige led a completely secretive life. She had a separate phone at her disposal, which she used for calls related to her professional activities. This phone became the key to unraveling a mystery that was far more complicated than even Paige's close friends and family could have imagined. Investigators' questions only multiplied. Why did such a conscientious mother and successful businesswoman decide to lead a double life? What did this secret profession have to do with her disappearance? All these questions became a priority in the investigation and added a new mystery to the investigation. Using a cell phone found in Paige's car, detectives accessed a list of contacts and calls made and received in the hours before the young woman's disappearance. The last call from that phone was made on June 28th at approximately 9 p.m. As a result of analyzing this information, 7 people were identified as suspects, and one of them was Lester Ralph Jones. Lester Jones' criminal history drew particular attention from investigators. He had a history of violence against a woman and kidnapping on his record. For the latter incident, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, that was not the only thing that alerted the police. His car was white in color, and from the external description was very similar to the car seen by Carol, Paige's friend. Carol shared important information with the detectives. She recounted an incident where Paige approached her car one day and saw another white car nearby that was blocking her driveway. Outraged, she got behind the wheel to turn around and drive away, but the cars collided, except that the unknown driver immediately fled the scene. With this information, investigators speculated that Lester may have been obsessed with Paige and following her. Further investigation revealed that Lester Jones attempted to make an appointment with Paige for intimate services the day before she disappeared. Lester was questioned and denied having any information about Paige's disappearance. He provided fingerprints and DNA samples. However, many suspicious items were found in Lester's home, including a disposable cell phone, men's wigs, Viagra, a sheet with the phone number of an escort service, and women's lingerie in various sizes. The disposable cell phone attracted particular attention from investigators. Analysis of call records on Paige's cell phone showed that on the day of her disappearance, someone tried to contact her several times from an unregistered number. Lester denied under questioning that he had a second cell phone. This meant he lied to the police. Using the packaging found at Lester's home, police were able to determine that the phone had nevertheless been purchased at a supermarket on North Avenue. Video footage from the store identified Lester as the purchaser. When he was shown the video footage, he refused to acknowledge that it depicted him. As a result of all this, Lester Jones became the prime suspect in Paige's disappearance. With no concrete evidence pointing to his guilt, the police continued to follow him and attempted to find Paige's body in order to have enough evidence to press charges. Case was put on hold for several years, and all the while, the young woman's family and loved ones were at a loss for grief. No one knew what had happened to the young mother, and the search seemed hopeless. As time went on, the hope that Paige would be found alive was dwindling. That all changed in 2012, when a hiker accidentally stumbled upon human remains in a ravine among rocks and bushes in Delta County. The find was discovered very close to the road, where Paige's personal belongings had been found 5 years earlier. Experts who arrived on the scene were almost certain that it was the body of a young mother. The experts ran a DNA test and the results confirmed that it was Paige. She was found, but it was a grisly end to her story. The exact cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the body, but it was found that Paige had been struck many times as several of her bones were broken, particularly the bones in her face. As a result, it was determined that she died from injuries sustained during the beating. This information added to the horrific drama of the story. Paige's body was underground, and due to years of soil erosion, ended up on the surface. This may explain why she was not discovered earlier. Lester Ralph Jones' case came to a halt for several years after Paige's remains were discovered. In November 2014, he was charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, and second-degree murder. However, the trial didn't begin until July 2016 and lasted 22 days. Prosecutors argued that Lester, who already had a history of violence against women, was frustrated at not being able to see Paige after trying to get an appointment with her. The main witness for the prosecution was Lester's ex-wife, Lisa. She recounted how the man kidnapped her and threatened to kill her at gunpoint in the late 1990s. According to Lisa, Lester could not reconcile with her decision to break up with him. On one occasion, he attacked the couple with a gun in his hands, and Lisa's partner was shot in the head. A month later, Lester threatened her again, telling her that she would now end up at the bottom of a lake. However, the woman managed to escape and contacted police, leading to Lester's arrest on kidnapping and assault charges. Lester's defense attorneys tried to argue that the police detained an innocent man and suggested that Paige's other potential clients may have also had a motive for the crime. However, they did not present convincing evidence linking other individuals to the murder. Lester's current spouse also appeared before the jury and argued that although he used an escort service, she did not abandon her husband because of her faith. However, she did not provide him with an alibi and identified him from a surveillance video at a supermarket where Lester was buying a disposable phone. On September 9, 2016, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and the first trial was declared a mistrial. However, the district attorney was convinced of Lester's guilt and wasn't about to give up. Over the next few days, he worked diligently on the investigation and re-examined all the evidence. On November 21, 2016, after reviewing the evidence, the jury finally reached a verdict. Lester was found guilty of all charges in connection with Paige's death. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The defense appealed the sentence, but in June 2022, an appeals court panel upheld the sentence and affirmed Lester's guilt. Paige's final farewell was held on April 28, 2012. Her obituary dedicated beautiful words to her, describing her as a beautiful and radiant woman whose smile could be compared to the sun. Her tragic loss has left its mark on the hearts of her family and friends. Her 3 children were orphaned and had to endure the loss of their mother, who had always been their support and encouragement. Page's case attracted public attention and dragged on for many years, but still the persistence and perseverance of relatives and law enforcement finally brought justice. Lester Ralph Jones was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now, he will no longer be able to harm other people. Page's story serves as a reminder of the importance of endeavoring to fight for justice, even if it takes a lot of time and effort. Her memory will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Story 3. In the spring of 2016, in the quiet town of Fort Worth, located in the state of Texas, there was a brutal and cynical murder that shocked even the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Paula Arellano, who worked as a paramedic, and you will be shocked to learn who was her executioner. The circumstances of the tragedy were so strange that at first the police even put forward the theory that Elizabeth may have voluntarily passed away. However, such a theory did not fit with the testimony of people who became accidental witnesses of the terrible scene. The investigation had to do a lot of hard work to understand everything and send the criminal to the dock. However, given the brutality of the crime he committed, the sentence handed down seemed too lenient and unfair to many. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born in 1987, August 16th, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young. He showed no interest in the fate of his daughter and did not contact her in any way. Soon her mother, Juanita, remarried to a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. The girl studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a guy named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon had a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents, but they did not interfere with their romance, because the chosen daughter seemed to them a man serious and quite reliable. At the age of 16 years, barely out of school, Elizabeth married her lover legally. The couple, one after another, had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. But despite the appearance of numerous heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a housewife. She remembered her childhood dream, so Elizabeth graduated from medical school and got a job as a paramedic, planning to get a higher education to become a doctor. The young woman was kind and pious, brought up in Christian traditions. She regularly took her children to church, instilling in them love and compassion for their neighbors. Family and friends characterized her as a very responsive person, always ready to help. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph seemed strong and happy. But after 13 years of living together, this union began to literally crack at the seams. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife before, trying to control her in everything, but over time his behavior became simply unbearable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to the house of her parents. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his fits of anger. In addition, she did not want the children almost every day to listen to the parents' scandals. So she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits and, in order to distract herself from family problems and a little divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So, on Friday evening, April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old young mother in the company of her friends went to a fun place. There she danced and had a good time, but did not touch alcohol because she planned to get home in her own car, on which she arrived at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. Having parked the car, she called her friend, with whom she had vacationed at the club that night, and told her that she had already reached home and that she was all right. Elizabeth then hung up the phone, but never entered the house. The next morning, her mother Juanita was very worried when she found her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth was planning to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned long ago. She couldn't leave somewhere unannounced, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that Elizabeth had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, it turned out that it was not locked. The key was still sticking in the ignition, and inside on the seat were her daughter's purse and cell phone. Naturally, she couldn't leave her personal belongings in the open car like that, which meant that something terrible had happened. The woman immediately called the police, reporting a missing person. The police believed that they would be able to solve the case, as they call it on hot tracks. In addition, there was still hope that Elizabeth was alive, because there was no blood or signs of struggle in the car. But it wasn't that simple. The first thing was to reconstruct in the smallest detail the chronology of the events of that evening and night, to trace Elizabeth's entire route, to find and question all possible witnesses. First, friends and colleagues of the young woman with whom she had spent the evening before her disappearance were interviewed. They gave the exact time when she went home, and later Elizabeth herself called back, saying that she had reached the place safely. In addition, several calls and messages from her ex-husband Rudolph Ariano, who had persistently tried to contact her that night, were found in the missing person's cell phone, but Elizabeth never answered him. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to the man, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Ariano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people, who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday, confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. The man assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Ariano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years. She was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of a young mother, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. The man said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4:30 in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so the man could not hear anything. Soon another witness was found walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Ariano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then a version was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable, because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives, who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. But who and for what reason could have so brutally massacred a mother of many children? Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone guarded her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of the deceased continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the number of suspects because he had no alibi and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, the man put on an act. He wept at the coffin of his ex-wife, saying that he would like to be in her place or die with her. According to his sister Elizabeth, she even believed in the sincerity of his words. In addition, Rudolph actively helped in the creation of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the ceremony of farewell to his wife. But after the funeral, when the man was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. After a detailed examination of all the CCTV footage from the last route Elizabeth took, it was determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from her parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near the deceased's house. Their neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road not far from the deceased's house. Moreover, it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which the woman had been thrown. This circumstance raised many questions, and when the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data on the night of the crime, the questions became even more. It turned out that the man made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's place of work, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. Apparently, he had been following her and eventually decided to wait for her return at Elizabeth's parents' house. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son. When the boy was shown the rope removed from his mother's neck, the son stated that he had seen it earlier in the backyard of his father's house and remembered it well because he had played with it. Moreover, the boy also recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before after the fence had been replaced. Also, small fragments of this concrete were found in the trunk of the car belonging to Rudolph. The investigation found that the man waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete. Afterward, he drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Rudolph Ariano was taken into custody 10 days after his ex-wife's body was recovered from the lake. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death, and then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. It wasn't until January 2019 that Ariano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke indifferently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, but noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of the deceased woman's children. Story 4. Paula Andrea Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Milan, was from Machorina, Managas. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, was from Tucupitu, a town in the state of Delta Emissaro. A year after Paula was born in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were looking for a better life for themselves and their daughter, a month after moving to Quito, capital of Ecuador. Relationship in the family deteriorated for a number of reasons. Andrina decided to break up with Leonardo and soon moved to Cuenca, the 3rd largest city in Ecuador. She took Paula with her, In Cuenca lived the mother of her best friend, who kindly offered to let her and the girl stay in the house while they found another place to live and work. Leonardo, the girl's father, given the breakup and other circumstances, decided to return to Venezuela, to his hometown of Tucupatu, and after a while immigrated again, this time to Trinidad, Tobago. At that time, Leonardo had already been disabled for a long time. The man's left arm had been completely disabled after an accident he had suffered while driving a motorcycle at a very young age. Since the man could not use his left arm, it was apparently difficult for him to find a good job even in Ecuador's capital city. After Andrina moved to Cuenca, she almost completely stopped communicating with Leonardo, only informing him once that she has taken a job on a farm in Tapacundo. A few months after separating from Leonardo, Andrina entered into new romantic relationship with a man named Washington Andreas Imero. Andreas was a local Ecuadorian, and more importantly, he was the owner of the farm where Andrina worked. The man grew up in a wealthy family. When Paula was about a year and a half, Andrina moved to a man together with Paula. Andreas and Andrina had a child together on April 7, 2019. With a newborn baby, family became happier and more united. However, everything changed when an event happened on March 27, 2020. Completely changed the lives of everyone involved. At the time, family was living well, enjoying every day, and things were going well on the farm. On one such day, as happy as it seemed, Andreas took Paula and by car went with her to the flower plantations. On the way there, girl got very sick. She became dizzy and began to vomit. Andreas had no choice but to stop at a public restroom. As soon as he and the girl entered it, Paula vomited again. He decided to leave her alone for a few minutes and went back to the car to find a change of clothes, since the girl's clothes were all dirty. When Andreas returned, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl. The man immediately pulled the girl out, tried to give her first aid, and soon brought her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was handed over to doctors, she no longer showed any signs of life. Doctors stated, Paula dead. After the doctors on duty performed an initial examination and assessed the girl's condition, they realized that the story Andreas told them was full of inconsistencies. For example, the doctors determined at the first glance that the girl had bruises on her body and face, the nature of which could not be attributed to the information her foster father told them. Medical protocol in such cases requires doctors to contact the police. Indeed, the situation itself suggested this. Shortly after the police arrived, Andreas was arrested as a suspect in Paula's murder. Although Andreas said Paula has drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy of the body revealed something much darker. First of all, the test showed that the girl had been dead for about 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital, which doesn't fit with the man's version of events. The girl's foster father claimed that he gave Paula first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that it all happened just 20 minutes before he took her to the hospital. On the other hand, the autopsy found that the girl has several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which caused her death. It became apparent that Paula's death was not an accident, as her small body has a significant number of both recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, the girl's father, learned of Paula's death on March 30th, 3 days after the events. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, had informed him of his daughter's death by the phone. She herself, in turn, learned it from Andreina's friend. It should be mentioned that after Leonardo has left Ecuador and Andreina had started a new relationship, she stopped all communication with him. That is why for 3 days Leonardo didn't know anything about her tragedy. Until that time he could see her only through the pictures Andreina and his mutual friends had sent him. In addition, Andreina blocked Leonardo in all social media, preventing him from communicating with Paula. She also cut off communication with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. Andreina even turned almost all of their mutual friends against the girl's birth father, telling them about his lack of desire to communicate with Paula, and so Leonardo was able to learn of his daughter's death. However, Andreina's family informed him of an alternative cause of death. They told him that Paula died of complications caused by COVID. At the time, Ecuador, like the rest of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. At the time, however, there were virtually no deaths from the coronavirus in the country. Leonardo was undoubtedly very suspicious that his daughter might have died from COVID, so he immediately began researching statistics on death from the virus in Ecuador. The statistics were posted on social media and news websites. Leonardo immediately noticed that there were no children among the few victims of the coronavirus in Ecuador. Leonardo's relatives helped him to investigate, and one of them soon sent him a newspaper article that mentioned the arrest of Andreas, who was suspected of killing Paula. Leonardo then began calling Andreina daily, and it wasn't until 10 days later that she decided to call him back herself. In that conversation, Andreina rather coldly informed Leonardo that Paula had died of COVID, and that she could not give him more information because her lawyers had forbidden her to do so. The next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page together with an acquaintance of his dedicated to Paula, as well as an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The published posts caused a huge backlash across social media. Their main goal was to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andreina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin dealing with her daughter's funeral, even though the prosecutor, who worked on the case, asked for more time to investigate the body, but the girl's funeral took place on April 10, 2020. Andreina simply did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on the girl. Thanks to the information posted on social media, Andreina's friends, people in her circle contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had in the years before her death. They sent Leonardo the information they had, most of which was based on isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and similar things. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, girl had to endure abuse from her stepfather, as well as her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in all of this. Everyone said that they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, the girl looked depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very frightful. At one point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather beat her because she misbehaved. One day, she even confessed that as punishment. Andreas pushed her and she hit her head on the wall. Paula called her stepfather nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares, and as a young child she already suffered from insomnia. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time of moving into the stepfather's home, sleep alone. When falling asleep, she often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. In addition, her mother and stepfather forced her to tuck in on her own, without help. Moreover, her mother, Andreina, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old. This was something out of the realm of reason. Paula was forced to cook her own breakfast and dinners, because her mother liked to sleep in the mornings and take a break from the baby in the evening. She simply didn't want to take care of her daughter. Not only that, Andreina was not bothered by the fact that the girl has to cope with baking oven by herself, despite the dangers. At the preschool, where mother had placed Paula, girl constantly complained of pain in her legs and back and often stated that she could not walk. Her constant complaints, as well as the bruises on her body, forced the teacher to show her to the doctors at the health center. After an examination, they concluded that the girl was being mistreated in the family. The girl's teachers then called the special police organization so they could investigate the girl's abuse in her family. Officials took up the case and decided to send the girl somewhere she could be safe while the investigation process was underway. As a result, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle, Andreina's brother. A hearing on the case was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never showed up. For whatever reason, they were unable to attend this hearing. As a result, it was decided to schedule a retrial for February 27, 2020. But even this time, Paula's teachers simply did not show up. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents, and then she was returned to her mother. Exactly 1 month later, on March 27th, the girl died. And the exact reason the teachers did not want to attend either of the two hearings is still unknown. It is speculated that Andreina may have bribed the teachers or simply convinced them that although the girl had some problems, the parents were not responsible for what their daughter said about them. After Paula's death, Andreas was placed in protective custody for the duration of the investigation, but he soon appealed this decision. As a result, a hearing was held on June 12, 2020, in which the judge set a restraining order and also determined that the man could be released to house arrest. But during the hearing, which was held via video conference, Andreas announced that he was dropping his appeal at the time Leonardo was still engaged in a social media campaign. He also asked his subscribers for financial support to be able to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. He wanted to file a complaint against Andreina, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At the time, Andreina had not yet been charged and was free. Fortunately, Leonardo was able to obtain sufficient financial aid, as well as free legal advice from two Ecuadorian lawyers, Osvaldo and Alejandro, who unselfishly offered him support and assistance in the lawsuit. Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela. He had to risk his life, float on a raft, and then cross the entire border from Nacharan to San Cristobal. He had to book private transfers, since the pandemic had canceled all services and he could not use the usual routes to get to Ecuador. Because of the pandemic situation, all maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed, so only few regular flights to 4 or 5 countries could be counted in the following months. Once Leonardo arrived in the state of Taquira, he had to cross the border into Colombia over rugged terrain, dangerous in itself. He then took a bus to the town of Ipaliso and continued on, through the hills and plains, to the Rumichic Bridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Then Leonardo took a cab and drove to Quiros. On June 30th, he had a meeting with a lawyer. Immediately upon arrival, father of the deceased girl filed a complaint against the ex-girlfriend, to also be considered as a suspect in Paula's murder. On July 6, 2020, Andreas was indicted and a woman appeared in court, which stated that she should not be remained in custody and the house arrest would be sufficient and that she had to report to justice twice a week. As a result, both Andreas and Andreina were charged with murder. The maximum punishment for which in the Ecuadorian Penal Code was about 13 years in prison. In November 2020, the first hearing in the case was held. At the time, a specific date for the start of the trial was still to be announced. During the hearing, Leonardo's attorney spoke to their concern about Andreina's possible escape, as she had previously attempted to take her own life with pills. They also applied for Andreina to be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge decided to grant the lawyer's request and also reduce the number of days the suspect had to appear in court to once a week instead of 2. However, a few days later, Andreina demanded to reconsider the decision of the necessity of wearing an electronic bracelet. On November 16th, another hearing was held to reconsider these decisions. Undoubtedly, all these details delayed the trial, but fortunately, the judge was able to set a date. It was set for December. The trial of Andreas and Andreina did not receive extensional media coverage. However, much of the information somehow made its way onto social media. And yet, because of the pandemic, which was a major topic in the information field, some of the facts went unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At the time, there still wasn't any decision made about Andreina's alternative ways of imprisonment, and Andreas was held in the Regional Detention Center. The trial was held behind closed doors, and no representative of the media was present. In addition, some of the participants connected to the hearing via video link. According to the doctor who performed the autopsy on the girl, Paula had nearly all of her spinal discs rebuilt. Some of her ribs were broken, and some had already fused. This meant that the girl has broken ribs before, which had eventually healed on their own. She also had nail stigmata, a condition in which the nails grow into the skin, bruises and scratches on her face and body, fluid accumulation in her lungs, scars on her head and lacerations on her colon. According to the assessment, it was the later injuries that caused the infection to develop and gradually lead to sepsis, which ultimately caused death. The autopsy report also confirmed that by the time Paula was taken to the hospital by Andreas, she had been dead for about 24 hours. The amount of internal and external injuries reflected the level of cruelty to which the little girl had been subjected, as well as the level of carelessness shown by her guardians, who had never once taken her to the doctors. On top of this, the girl was malnourished, underweight, and too diminutive for her age, with mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, Andreina, the girl's mother, tried to convince her family friends that the child has a lot of psychological problems, that the consequence of these problems was a tendency to self-torture, through which Paula tried to attract attention to herself. According to the girl's mother, when her younger brother was born, Paula began to lack parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and tried to manipulate everyone through crying. The trial also revealed that in October 2019, when Paula was supposed to remain in her uncle's custody, according to the board's decision, she actually continued to stay at her parents' house and only slept at her uncle's house for a few nights. In other words, the measures taken by the police organization did not have the desired effect. In turn, it was possible to establish that in 2017, only a few months after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, the girl began to suffer from abuse. It most likely began immediately after Andreina entered into relationship with Andreas. The trial was attended by more than 40 witnesses of the accusing party, who were able to confirm the fact that Paula had to endure abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the last hearing, before the judge handed down the verdict, Andreina stated that she took sole responsibility for the child's abuse. The woman claimed that she herself had beaten Paula with a belt and at times with her fists. Through this statement, the girl's mother actually attempted to remove blame from her man. She said directly that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andreina also stated that she chastised her daughter for causing her problems with her new husband. Breaking up with her new husband meant being back on the street and losing the financial stability she could only have around this man. Taking care of her daughter was her last priority. After becoming acquainted with Paula's life situation, the judges were concerned about the couple's newborn son, but it's safe to say that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It must be said that Andreas has indeed chosen to exercise his right to remain silent and has never made any statement about the incident since his arrest. By the February 3, 2021, Paula's trial was finished and the couple was sentenced. Both defendants were found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum sentence for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the accusing party demanded exactly the maximum punishment for the perpetrators. But the chief judge decided to take into account an aggravating factor, namely that Paula was only 4 years old, which means that she could not defend herself against her attackers. As a result, the judge sentenced Andreina and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, the convicts have 3 days to appeal the verdict, so the couple was expected to appeal immediately. Even though Andreina was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, she still remained on house arrest and not went to jail. The fact is that the woman used her opportunity to appeal, so now the higher court needs to confirm her sentence for incarceration. In the meantime, the woman continues to comply with the measures that were originally taken. This is not the case with Andreas, as he was arrested at the time of his appearance at the hospital with a dead girl. Undoubtedly, the fact that Andreina is still at large is causing public indignation and anger, most importantly, the anger of Leonardo, who is worried that the woman might take advantage of the situation to escape justice. Story 5. Betrayal rarely happens suddenly. It starts with small things, hidden messages, unexpected excuses, brief meetings that go unmentioned. One person is lying, keeping secrets, enjoying the illusion of freedom. The other begins to suspect, searching for proof. And with each passing day, the need for control turns into obsession. This story is about how infidelity led to the most devastating consequences. When jealousy transforms into a desire for destruction and love turns into manipulation, predicting the outcome becomes impossible. What started as an ordinary affair ended in a way no one could have foreseen. In September 2023, a small suburban home became the scene of one of the most shocking and unpredictable events in recent history. Officers responding to the call had no idea that this case would turn out to be more than just a violent crime. It was a carefully orchestrated game where every participant was nothing more than a pawn. Nathaniel Ruiz Jr. was born around 1993 in one of Chicago's most troubled neighborhoods. His exact birth date remains unknown, emphasizing the chaos that surrounded his early life. He grew up in an environment where aggression and criminal activity were part of everyday existence. From a young age, Nathaniel displayed signs of an impulsive and uncontrollable nature. In school, he frequently got into fights, clashed with teachers, and showed little interest in academics. His first run-in with the law happened during his teenage years when he was caught participating in a robbery. However, since he was underage, he avoided any serious punishment. It didn't take long for him to realize that the criminal world offered more than just an adrenaline rush. It also brought financial rewards. As time went on, his offenses became more severe. In 2016, he was arrested for assault, and a year later, he was taken into custody again for driving under the influence. But Nathaniel's real fascination was with firearms. He collected weapons and took pride in his growing arsenal. His social media accounts were filled with photos of handguns, rifles, and ammunition. Eventually, this activity caught the attention of law enforcement, and a court ruling prohibited him from owning any firearms. However, Nathaniel had no intention of complying. Ignoring the restriction, he continued to acquire weapons through illegal means. Despite his legal troubles, he decided to start a business and launched a private security company. However, the operation was entirely illegitimate. He lacked the necessary license, and legally, he wasn't even allowed to carry a firearm. Nevertheless, he aggressively promoted his services on social media, posting photos of himself wearing body armor and carrying weapons. Linda Palomo was born on February 3, 1973. By the time she met Nathaniel, she was an independent woman, a mother of 5 and already a grandmother. Unlike Nathaniel, she grew up in a relatively stable family, but her personal life had been complicated. She married young, but the marriage didn't last. Left to raise her sons and daughters on her own, she learned to handle life struggles without relying on anyone. She worked multiple jobs to support her family and helped care for her grandchildren. Despite everything, she still longed for personal happiness. Linda was known for her strong personality. Her family respected her, though some found her overly strict. She liked to be in control, ensuring that everything happened on her terms. Betrayal was something she couldn't tolerate, and she expected unwavering loyalty from those closest to her. When Nathaniel entered her life, no one could quite understand what connected them. He was 20 years younger, had a troubled past, and a volatile temperament, yet their relationship developed quickly. Their meeting was purely coincidental. Some say they met through mutual acquaintances. At first, Linda didn't take Nathaniel seriously, but his confidence, persistence, and dangerous charisma drew her in. For Nathaniel, Linda was someone who made him feel secure. She provided him with shelter and emotional support. For Linda, it was something new, an experience she hadn't had before. She felt in control, as if she was the one shaping this younger man's path. Their connection was unusual, two people so different yet somehow held together by that very contrast. They moved in together, and before long, Linda's sons, daughters, and grandchildren were living under the same roof. The house became crowded, but it wasn't a home filled with warmth. The tension was growing. Neighbors and acquaintances noticed that their relationship was anything but harmonious. Nathaniel had a short fuse, while Linda insisted on keeping everything under control. Their romance resembled a ticking time bomb, but no one could have predicted how far things would go. Nathaniel had no intention of giving up his collection, even with legal restrictions in place. He continued acquiring handguns and rifles through illegal sources, making shady deals and exploiting legal loopholes. He enjoyed displaying his strength and took pride in his growing arsenal. He could spend hours discussing calibers, mechanisms, and modifications, or simply admiring his collection. At first, it was just a fascination, but over time, firearms became an inseparable part of his daily life. He carried a handgun even inside the house, often disassembling and reassembling it right at the kitchen table. He left his weapons out in the open, and it didn't take long for those around him to start feeling uneasy. At first, Linda didn't interfere. She didn't care much about what Nathaniel was up to as long as he was bringing money into the house. She turned a blind eye to the fact that his business was illegal and never asked questions. But over time, she began to realize it wasn't just about the money. Nathaniel's behavior was becoming more unpredictable. He would lash out if something didn't go his way, Sometimes he'd lose his temper over the smallest things, someone looking at him the wrong way or speaking at the wrong time. His outbursts came suddenly, but just as quickly, he'd calm down, acting as if nothing had happened. The first to openly express concern was Christina, one of Linda's daughters. She saw what others either missed or ignored. Nathaniel wasn't just an unpleasant person. He was someone capable of anything. Christina never trusted him. She noticed how he talked about aggression, how he carried himself as if he were superior to everyone else. He couldn't stand being contradicted and always made sure he had the final say. But what scared her the most was how easily he could snap. During one argument, he clenched his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. At that moment, Christina knew, if he wasn't stopped, one day he would cross the line. The atmosphere in the house grew more and more tense. No one spoke about it openly, but the fear of Nathaniel was becoming impossible to ignore. And this was only the beginning. By 2021, Nathaniel and Linda had been living together for 6 years. On the surface, everything seemed stable, but their relationship had long since lost its foundation. Nathaniel had never been the type to stay loyal to one woman, but now his affairs had become routine. He met people through social media, started new relationships, then quickly moved on to the next. Secret conversations became a daily habit. He used messaging apps, hid his contacts, and meticulously deleted his conversations. He often left the house late at night, claiming it was for work, meetings with clients, or personal matters. Sometimes, Linda would wake up in the middle of the night and find that he wasn't home. He would return in the early hours, never offering an explanation. Nathaniel wasn't afraid of getting caught. He believed Linda either wouldn't find out or wouldn't dare to do anything about it. He was convinced he was in control, but he underestimated her. At first, Linda ignored the changes in his behavior, but over time, she began noticing how often he was gone, how frequently he was texting someone, how suddenly he started paying more attention to his appearance. She didn't immediately put the pieces together, but the suspicion was growing. Her patience finally ran out when she happened to see a message pop up on his phone, one that left no room for doubt. The text hinted at a recent meeting, confirming what she had long suspected. But Linda didn't explode right away. She understood that if Nathaniel was being unfaithful, it meant he felt untouchable. Instead of confronting him, she decided to gather more evidence. She started watching him closely, checking his messages, analyzing his habits. Now she could tell when he was lying, when he was trying to cover his tracks, when he was sneaking off to another meeting. Linda wasn't the kind of woman who forgave betrayal. Her personality wouldn't allow her to simply accept the situation or walk away without consequences. She had no intention of causing a dramatic scene, but she also wasn't going to let Nathaniel get away with it. With each new piece of proof, her anger grew. She saw two options: leave and cut him out of her life, or make him regret every decision he had made. And the longer she thought about it, the clearer it became. She wasn't going to be just another woman he left behind. Linda wasn't about to act on impulse. She knew that a direct confrontation with Nathaniel could escalate into something uncontrollable. So, she chose a different approach. Instead of a heated argument, she started planning a more subtle form of revenge. She needed something that would make his life unbearable, something that would turn the tables and put him in a vulnerable position. She didn't yet know what her next move would be, but she was certain of one thing. Her silence was just the calm before the storm. After months of careful observation, Linda began putting her plan into action. The first step, creating fake accounts. She registered multiple profiles on different platforms, using photos of random people and selecting believable names. Some of these accounts belonged to mysterious women, others to dangerous individuals with questionable backgrounds. Linda studied how online scams worked, learning the techniques used to deceive people and manipulate them into believing something, even if it wasn't true. She built an intricate system where each of her fake personas had a play. One could be a seductress, another someone who knew too much, and a third an anonymous threat. Together, they would create an atmosphere of paranoia around Nathaniel, making him believe he was caught in a dangerous game. To make her scheme more convincing, Linda started researching criminal networks. She immersed herself in learning about underground organizations, studying their intimidation tactics, the language of threats, and the art of psychological manipulation. She read about the mafia, cartels, and underground networks that controlled the flow of illegal money. She studied their hierarchy, communication styles, and even tried to replicate their messaging patterns. But her most powerful tool was her ability to control information. Using specialized software and hidden features on social media, she learned how to track a person's location, access their contacts, and monitor conversations. Before long, she had acquired enough knowledge to make Nathaniel believe in the reality of her deception. Once everything was in place, Linda put her plan into motion. She was the first to reach out to Nathaniel using one of her fabricated accounts. The profile she created belonged to a mysterious woman who seemed genuinely interested in him. Nathaniel didn't suspect a thing. He was used to these kinds of connections and responded immediately, but unlike his usual online encounters, this one took an unexpected turn. After a few days of casual conversation, Linda, posing as her invented persona, began dropping hints that she knew about his past. Her messages contained just enough details to make him uneasy. Then she made the first move toward trapping him psychologically, sending him a message with his real-time location. This was just the beginning, but it was enough to put Nathaniel on edge. Linda had achieved her first victory. He was afraid, but she had no intention of stopping there. The initial scare worked. Nathaniel was getting nervous, but she needed more. She escalated the game by creating even more fake accounts. Now he wasn't just being contacted by strangers. He was surrounded by dangerous figures, Bulgarian mafia members, cartel enforcers, hitmen. Each had their own story, their own motives, their own demands. Messages came from different numbers and platforms. Some were threats, others offered protection, while a few presented him with bizarre ultimatums. One hinted that his survival depended on completing simple tasks. Another suggested that he was already caught in something much bigger and there was no way out. Nathaniel tried to make sense of it all, but there was no logic. Everything seemed terrifyingly real. His behavior started to change. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, avoiding calls from unknown numbers, checking to see if he was being followed. Sometimes he even asked Linda to drive him to a different location, just to be sure he wasn't being tracked. He deleted messages, changed his passwords, and tried to throw off his pursuers. But all of it only deepened his paranoia. Linda knew exactly what she was doing. She could see how fear was eating away at his mind. Her plan was working. Nathaniel was no longer focused on his usual habits. His entire world revolved around fighting a threat that didn't even exist. What he failed to realize was that the real danger was much closer than he thought. In May 2023, a new woman entered Nathaniel's life, Zira. They met at his new job where she was one of his colleagues. At first, their interactions were nothing out of the ordinary. But before long, they began taking an interest in each other. Zira was married and raising 2 children, but her family life didn't bring her happiness. She had a history of infidelity, and meeting Nathaniel was just another chapter in that pattern. She didn't see it as a problem. She believed her personal happiness mattered more than any social expectations. Nathaniel wasn't thinking about consequences either. His relationship with Linda had long since lost its meaning, and his affair with Zira gave him the excitement he'd been missing. It started with lingering glances and subtle hints, but soon they were talking constantly. Linda had been keeping tabs on Nathaniel for a long time. The moment he started interacting with Zira, she noticed. At first, she didn't think much of it. His brief affairs weren't news to her, but soon she realized this time was different. Their messages quickly escalated beyond casual flirtation. Nathaniel told Zira he loved her, that he dreamed of a future with her. She said the same. They made plans, imagined a new life together, and spoke as if everything would change one day. Linda read each message, one after another, unable to believe her eyes. She was consumed by humiliation. She had spent months weaving an elaborate scheme to keep Nathaniel under her control, forcing him to live in constant fear. And yet, despite everything, he was still living his life, completely oblivious to her efforts. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a mockery of her power. Linda could no longer stand by and watch. It was no longer about controlling him. It was about making him pay. She escalated her psychological game, introducing a new wave of threats. This time, the characters were even more menacing, even more persistent. The supposed mafia figures warned Nathaniel that he was in grave danger, that he was playing with fire. The message was clear. His involvement with Zira had to end immediately. But this time, he wasn't afraid. Everything he had endured over the past months had numbed him to fear. He believed he had already survived the worst. And besides, he was too consumed by his feelings for Zira to walk away now. For the first time, Nathaniel wasn't just hiding his affair. He was fighting for it. Linda changed her approach. She realized that if she wanted to break Nathaniel completely, she couldn't just target him. She had to go after Zira as well. The first step was planting fear in Alberto, Zira's husband. Using fake accounts, she sent him cryptic messages hinting at his wife's infidelity, attaching photos, and fueling his suspicions. When that didn't have the desired effect, she escalated her tactics, this time with direct threats. Alberto began receiving anonymous letters warning him that his family was in danger, that his loved ones could get hurt. Linda knew that fear for his family would force him to take action. The pressure worked. At first, Alberto tried to ignore the threats, but soon, the unease took hold. He had no idea who was behind it, but he could feel that this was more than just an issue between husband and wife. Linda had achieved exactly what she wanted. Tension was growing in Zira's home, and fear was beginning to dictate their decisions. Still, Nathaniel wasn't completely broken. Despite the paranoia Linda had planted, despite the relentless pressure from the fabricated criminal organizations, he still clung to Zira. Now, Linda decided to strike at his weakest point, his trust. She let him know that she was aware of Zira, and then began feeding him a new narrative, that Zira wasn't who she claimed to be. She convinced him that Zira was actually working for the mafia. Linda had gathered enough information to make this lie believable. She sent him messages from different informants, suggesting that Zira always knew more than she let on, and that her presence in his life wasn't a coincidence. She carefully crafted the illusion so that Nathaniel had no choice but to believe it. The messages hinted that his phone was being monitored, that his movements were being tracked, and that Zira was merely using him to gather information. Before long, Nathaniel started seeing the pieces fall into place. In his mind, everything finally made sense. This explained why the so-called mafia knew so much about him, why he was being followed, why Zira never seemed intimidated by the threats. But Linda didn't stop there. Now, she demanded proof of his loyalty. Nathaniel had to prove that he wouldn't betray those who had supposedly saved him from a deadly fate. Slowly, the conversations about dealing with Zira and her family became more direct. The message was clear. There was no other way out. Exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely under Linda's control, Nathaniel finally gave in. He no longer questioned what was real. Linda had won. He was ready to do whatever it took. Nathaniel no longer questioned what had to be done. In his mind, there was no fear, no regret, only the firm belief that he was carrying out an unavoidable task. He began planning the crime with the same focus and precision he had once used to build his illicit business. The first step was surveillance. He studied Zira's schedule, noting when she was home and who was with her. He paid special attention to moments when her husband and family might be vulnerable. He examined the entrances to the house, mapped out possible escape routes, and spent several days tracking their movements, memorizing every detail. At the same time, he gathered supplies. He already had an arsenal, but he needed additional tools. New clothes, gloves, bags, tape, a flashlight. He and Linda went shopping together, careful not to draw attention. Linda remained in the background, making sure it never seemed like she was involved. They discussed every step as if preparing for a high-stakes operation. Linda played the role of an advisor, nudging Nathaniel in the right direction, reinforcing the idea that he had to do this correctly. She kept him convinced that this was the only way out. By the time everything was ready, Nathaniel had stopped thinking about consequences. He believed he was simply doing what needed to be done. The decision had been made. Now all that was left was to act. The night arrived. The plan was about to become reality. Linda showed no sign of nerves, behaving as if she knew nothing. Late that night, they drove toward Zira's house. Linda was behind the wheel, driving calmly as if running an errand. She asked a few times why he needed to go there, but Nathaniel didn't answer. He didn't care what she thought. His focus was locked on his target. When they arrived, Linda stayed in the car while Nathaniel stepped out and walked toward the house. He already knew the front door would be locked, so he went around to the backyard, broke a window and slipped inside. The sound of shattering glass woke Alberto. He got out of bed and went to check the noise. At that moment, Nathaniel fired, but missed. Alberto immediately realized this wasn't just a break-in. He spun around and ran toward the hallway, trying to reach his family's room, hoping to shield them from the intruder. But Nathaniel caught up with Alberto in the hallway. A few shots rang out, and Alberto collapsed to the floor before he could reach the door. The house fell silent, broken only by Nathaniel's heavy breathing. Hearing the gunfire, Zira barricaded herself in the bedroom with her family. She held them close, unsure who had come for them. Nathaniel tried to force the door open, but it held, so he aimed at the lock and fired. The bullet tore through the wood, striking Zira. She stopped moving. The door swung open. The room fell into a stunned silence. The last sounds the neighbors heard were short and muffled. It was over in minutes. Nathaniel surveyed the house. He overturned furniture to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, scattering items to stage a struggle. Then he walked back to the car where Linda was waiting. She didn't even ask how it went. They simply drove away, leaving chaos behind. For a brief moment, silence filled Zira's home, but not for long. Neighbors, alarmed by the sound of gunfire and breaking glass, quickly called the authorities. The call came in around 4 a.m., and within minutes, officers arrived at the scene. They found signs of forced entry and moved inside. The scene before them left no doubt. This was no random act of aggression, but a meticulously planned crime. Nathaniel's first mistake was failing to cover all the details of the staged robbery. Nothing valuable was missing, and the evidence pointed to a deliberate attack rather than a break-in gone wrong. Even the scattered items did little to convince investigators that theft had been the motive. But the biggest mistake? It didn't take long for police to connect the crime to someone with a motive. By morning, detectives were already looking into Zira's personal connections. Everyone at work knew about her affair with Nathaniel. Colleagues described their relationship as more than just a casual fling. They had talked about a future together. Nathaniel's name quickly became the focus of the investigation. As detectives dug into his background, they uncovered a long list of prior offenses, illegal dealings, and a well-documented obsession with weapons. Everything pointed straight to him. While the police gathered evidence, Linda kept playing her game. She continued messaging Nathaniel under the guise of the mafia, reassuring him that everything was going according to plan. She fed him the illusion that he was being protected, that as long as he followed instructions, he would be safe. She made sure he believed one thing above all, that the authorities would never be able to prove his guilt. But the investigation was moving too fast. Detectives started digging into Nathaniel's recent activity and uncovered several inconsistencies. When they examined his calls and messages, they found that in the past few months, he had received an overwhelming number of threats, not from real criminal organizations, but from newly created anonymous accounts. This raised new questions. If the mafia was truly behind this, why did all the evidence point only to Nathaniel? Why were there so many coincidences? What if the threat wasn't real but carefully staged? These doubts became a turning point in the case. For the first time, investigators began to suspect that there was more to this story than just a gang-related crime. As the investigation neared its conclusion, Nathaniel realized he was running out of time. He knew the police were closing in, and his arrest was inevitable. Panic set in when he noticed that he was being followed. He tried convincing himself that the mafia would step in and protect him, but deep down he knew the truth. Desperate for help, he turned to his mother. They met in a secluded spot, away from prying eyes. He told her he was in danger, that he was being accused of a serious crime, that he needed to disappear. But instead of support, he saw fear and hesitation. She didn't want to be involved. She understood that helping him meant becoming part of the crime. For a few days, Nathaniel attempted to stay hidden, but surveillance cameras caught him at a grocery store. He wasn't alone. Linda was with him. As soon as the police confirmed their location, a pursuit began. Patrol cars surrounded the area, but Linda and Nathaniel managed to get onto the highway. He was behind the wheel, and she sat beside him, watching the chaos unfold. The real question now was who was truly in control. Nathaniel believed he was the one steering the situation, but in reality, everything was unfolding exactly as Linda had planned. The police had been chasing them for miles, but Nathaniel had no intention of stopping. He gripped the steering wheel, pushing the car faster, weaving through traffic, determined to escape. Adrenaline overpowered his fear. Linda sat beside him, eerily calm. She didn't tell him to stop. She didn't scream or beg him to surrender. She just watched, as if she already knew how this would end. They sped onto a congested stretch of highway. Nathaniel tried to swerve around a truck, but lost control at the last moment. The car skidded, slammed into the guardrail, and flipped multiple times before coming to a violent stop. When officers approached the wreckage, the inside of the vehicle was eerily silent. Nathaniel was still in the driver's seat, a gun in his hand. Linda was beside him, lifeless. In the final moments before the crash, he had fired at her, then turned the weapon on himself. Investigators later examined the scene, trying to understand why he had done it. Was it an act of revenge? A final outburst of rage? Or had he realized, in those last few seconds, who had truly been behind everything? Had Linda confessed to him during that final ride, revealing that it had all been her doing? There were no answers. The only two people who knew the truth were gone. But the investigation didn't stop with their deaths. Detectives combed through their recent movements, phone records, and messages. At first, police believed Linda had been a victim, a woman caught under the influence of a dangerous man. But the deeper they looked, the clearer it became that the real story was something else entirely. The key breakthrough came from analyzing Linda's devices. Her laptop and phone contained archives of messages, dozens of fake accounts, and logs of visits to sites linked to surveillance tools and social engineering tactics. It didn't take long for forensic experts to piece it together. Linda had orchestrated the entire web of threats, making Nathaniel believe he was being hunted by a criminal syndicate. Even more damning were her own messages, where she meticulously directed his actions, pushing him toward an inevitable conclusion. Logan records, IP addresses, and chat histories all pointed to her as the mastermind behind the entire scheme. She hadn't just preyed on Nathaniel's fears, she had carefully led him down a path of destruction. The recovered files revealed that this manipulation had been happening not for weeks, but for over a year. This wasn't an emotional breakdown or a crime of passion. It was a meticulously constructed plan. She had studied psychological manipulation, researched surveillance techniques, and tested different ways to control a person's mind. When the truth came out, the case took on an entirely new dimension. What had initially looked like an act of jealousy turned out to be something far more chilling, a calculated psychological game where Linda had been the true orchestrator. The ultimate irony was that her own deception led to her downfall. She had sought to control everything until the very end, but in the end, she became the victim of the very illusion she had created. She had pushed Nathaniel to commit crimes, convinced him to believe in a fabricated reality, and in the final moment he turned against her. The case was officially closed, but the lingering questions remained. Did Nathaniel realize the truth before it was too late? Or did he die still believing he was a pawn in a war that never even existed? There were no answers, only the undeniable fact that the most dangerous weapon isn't a bullet or a blade. It's a lie powerful enough to destroy a person from the inside. Story 6. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. In abusive relationships, one person often exhibits cruelty, aggression, and disrespect toward the other, whether a partner, spouse, relative, or colleague. Those who act overtly in such ways are often dismissed as just hot-headed or unable to control their emotions. However, the more dangerous form of abuse is the hidden kind, where others don't even suspect it, believing the family to be perfect until a tragedy occurs. The relationship between Alsu Sabashnikova and Timur Prokhorov was seen by everyone as a model of true love, understanding, and mutual support. They both grew up in the small rural community of Malexiskoj and met during their school years. After years of dating, they seemed destined for each other. The couple had a grand wedding with relatives coming from all over the region, but just 3 days after the celebration, the newlyweds were buried in the same grave at the local cemetery. What happened? Let's break down this complicated case. Alsu Sabashnikova, later Prokhorova, was born on January 4, 2001, in the village of Melex, located in the Tukovsky district of the Republic of Tatarstan. She was the youngest of 2 children. Alsu grew up alongside her older brother, Ruslin, who always looked out for her and protected her. When the children were still in school, their parents divorced, and the siblings stayed with their mother, Ilfira Shariva. Soon after, their mother remarried, and the family moved to the home of her new husband in the village of Malekskoj, about 12 miles from the larger city of Neborazny Chelny. Alsu and Ruslin were accepting of their mother's choice and quickly formed a bond with their stepfather, who treated them as his own children. In turn, they also began calling him Dad. The village was small, quiet, and peaceful, with a population of just over 2,000 people. Most residents knew one another well. Alsu and Ruslin adapted quickly, enrolled in the local school, and made many new friends. Life here was calm, without the hustle and bustle found in larger cities. The community was mostly made up of Russians, Tatars, and Uzbeks. Once a week, the local community center held dances, and there were also classes for the performing arts, dance, and choral singing. On holidays, concerts showcasing local talent were common. Alsu excelled in school and was a straight-A student. Teachers described her as very smart, responsible, serious, and goal-orientated, a girl you could always rely on. She had a calm and balanced nature, was a born diplomat, and could peacefully resolve any conflict. On top of that, Alsu was incredibly beautiful, attracting people with her kindness, and everyone wanted to be her friend. Alsu's closest friend, from childhood until her tragic end, was her paternal cousin, Sabrina Sobashnikova. Sabrina was 3 years younger than Alsu, but the girls never seemed to notice the age gap. They kept in touch constantly, shared their most intimate secrets, and looked so much alike that they could have been sisters. Unfortunately, they would both share a tragic fate in the end. From a young age, Alsu experienced serious health challenges. She contracted a severe viral infection that led to complications with her kidneys. As a result, she suffered from chronic kidney failure, a condition that only worsened over time. Alsu was forced to regularly travel to a specialized clinic in Neborazny Chelny for treatment and supportive care. She also underwent multiple blood cleansing procedures known as hemodialysis, as her kidneys were no longer able to perform their primary functions. The Sobashnikova family was not wealthy, and the ongoing medical treatments, medications, and procedures required significant financial resources. During flare-ups of her condition, Alsu had to switch to homeschooling, sometimes missing several months of school. As a result, she wasn't able to fully prepare for her graduation exams or entrance exams for higher education. Despite these challenges, Alsu dreamed of furthering her education and hoped to attend the prestigious Neborazny Chelny branch of the Kazan Innovative University. She aimed to pursue a degree in economics, but she knew that her health would make it difficult to keep up with the demands of university life. Moreover, the majority of the family's budget went toward her treatments and medications, making it impossible for her to afford tuition. Her mother reassured her, suggesting that she could initially attend a vocational college and acquire a skill that would provide stable income, postponing higher education for later. Alsu tried to stay positive, determined to find a career she enjoyed and to become independent, not wanting to be a burden on her family. She remained optimistic about the future and continued to search for her path. She completed courses in eyelash extension and nail care and began taking clients at home, which was an ideal arrangement for her given her health situation. While still in school, also met Timur Prokhorov, an older high school student who was 4 years her senior. The two quickly developed a close bond, which later blossomed into a romantic relationship. This relationship eventually led to their marriage. What do we know about Timur Prokhorov? Timur was born in 1997 in Naborozni Chelny, the younger of two sons in a relatively well-off family. His parents ran a small but stable business that provided them with a comfortable income, allowing them to give their children the best, particularly in terms of education. Timur's older brother Artur, who was very close to him, earned a law degree and now works with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. In the late 2000s, the Prokhorov family purchased land in the village of Maleksko and began building their home. Several years later, they moved to the area with their children and settled in. The boys helped their parents with the construction and finishing work on the house, as well as managing the household. Timur, according to friends, teachers, and locals, was always a kind and level-headed guy. He avoided conflicts and even more so, fights. He preferred to negotiate and resolve things peacefully. He was the kind of person who could admit when he was wrong and would apologize if felt he had done something wrong. In school, he was a good student, though not an outstanding one. He was involved in local arts, danced in a group, performed at the community center, and continued to perform even as an adult. When Timur's older brother was in university, he got married and moved back to Naborozni Chelny. Shortly after, the couple had 2 children, and they would often visit their relatives in Maleksko. The nephews and loved their uncle dearly and cherished their time with him. Timur was equally fond of them, often spoiling them and happily spending time with them. After finishing school, Timur enlisted in the military and served in the Navy. By this time, he and Alsu had already been dating, and she was eagerly awaiting his return. Not long after, Timur's mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. She quickly deteriorated and passed away within a few months, despite all efforts to treat her. A year later, Timur's father remarried, and his new wife was soon welcomed into the family. His adult children quickly bonded with her and embraced her as part of their family. About 6 months later, the couple moved back to Naborozni Chelny to focus on business, and the nearly finished house in the village was passed on to their younger son, who continued to work on it himself. As mentioned earlier, Alsu and Timur met in high school, and their mutual affection developed quickly. Alsu was upfront with him about her serious health issues, but this didn't scare him away. Instead, he reassured her that they would face it together, enduring the hardships and challenges that came their way. After returning from military service, Timur continued his studies and later started working at his family's company. He earned well enough to support not only himself but also Alsu. However, Alsu didn't want to be a burden on anyone, so she continued to work hard from home. Unfortunately, due to her condition, she had to stop doing nail extensions as she could no longer work with most of the materials. Timur was incredibly caring toward Alsu. He drove her to Naborozni Chelny and Kazan for her medical checkups, treatments, and therapies. He took care of her, always looking out for her and cherishing her deeply. He also got along well with Alsu's mother, who accepted him as her own son. In 2018, Alsu's health began to deteriorate rapidly. Her kidneys were failing, and she was no longer able to live without regular dialysis. The only chance for her survival was a kidney transplant. The perfect match was her own mother, who could be her donor, but the surgery and subsequent treatment were incredibly expensive, and the family simply didn't have the funds. Elias was in a precarious position, teetering between life and death. Due to severe swelling, her face became nearly unrecognizable. She was deeply distressed by the situation, especially her appearance, and didn't want Timur to see her like that. She even tried to stop him from visiting her in the hospital. However, Timur refused to listen to her, insisting on staying by her side. The news of Alsu's grave condition and the urgent need for an expensive surgery quickly spread through the town. Concerned neighbors decided to help in whatever way they could. A charity concert was organized at the local community center, and all the funds raised were donated to Alsu's family. Interestingly, Timur also performed that night as part of a dance group. The necessary amount was raised in a short time, and the life-saving surgery was paid for. Alsu and her mother traveled to a well-known clinic in Moscow, where a renowned surgeon had agreed to take on this difficult case. The surgery itself was a success, and both women managed to endure it well. However, Alsu faced a long recovery ahead. She had to take constant medication, stick to a strict diet, and undergo regular checkups to ensure that the transplanted kidney was functioning properly. Alsu spent nearly 6 months in the hospital, and after that, she stayed home for another year to avoid any risk of infection. Even a common cold could have been fatal to her in that fragile state. She followed all the doctor's instructions, even though it was incredibly hard for her both physically and mentally. Her mother, stepfather, and brother supported her through every step, encouraging her to stay positive and believe everything would be okay. They were also deeply concerned about her relationship with Timur. Not every young man could accept and cope with his partner's health struggles. If Timur had decided to leave at any point, no one would have blamed him, but he was resolute in his decision to stay with Alsu. During Alsu's illness, Timur practically lived at the hospital, staying by her bedside, and then at her parents' house. He was always ready to help, whether it was taking her to medical appointments or even traveling to another city in search of the necessary medication. Shortly after Alsu was discharged from the clinic, Timur officially proposed to her, and she happily accepted. In August 2021, Alsu and Timur went through the nikah ceremony, an important religious act in Islam that marks the union of a couple, similar to a Christian wedding. Afterward, they moved into the groom's house, which was still being completed. Alsu continued to work from home, while Timur commuted daily to his job in Naborozni Chelny. They were saving up for a lavish wedding, which they planned to hold in January. On January 4, 2022, Alsu turned 21, and on January 20th, the couple held their wedding at her parents' house. Family and friends from all over the Republic gathered to celebrate. Everyone wished the newlyweds a long and happy life together, and the celebration stretched on for 3 days. Guests described the couple as glowing with joy and happiness. Timur had expressed his desire to call Alsu's mother, Ilfira Shirieva, Mom, and Ilfira, moved to tears, thanked God and fate for bringing such a wonderful husband to her daughter and a son-in-law to her. Alsu's bridesmaid was 18-year-old Sabrina, who had come from another city for the wedding and was scheduled to return on January 23rd for school on the 24th. She stayed at the newlyweds' home, where she had a separate room. Other guests were accommodated in Alsu's parents' house and nearby relatives' homes, as there were no hotels in the village or surrounding areas. On the night of January 23rd, Ilfira had a terrible dream where she couldn't find her daughter and saw her son-in-law silently tossing small coins into her hands. She woke up around 5 a.m., feeling deeply anxious and could not fall back asleep. She wanted to call Alsu, but it was too early, so she decided to wait a little longer. By 7 a.m., Ilfira couldn't wait any longer and called her daughter. There was no answer. Neither Sabrina nor Timur answered their phones either. Ilfira and her husband decided to the newlyweds' house. When they arrived around 7:30 a.m., they noticed Timur's car wasn't in the yard. At first, this didn't seem too alarming, but when Ilfira tried the door and realized it was unlocked, panic set in. There was no way her daughter, son-in-law, and sister could have left the house without locking it. Ilfira entered the house and began calling for her daughter and son-in-law, but there was no response. When she entered the living room, she nearly collapsed at the sight before her. On the floor, in pools of blood, lay the lifeless bodies of Alsu and Sabrina. The women had been stabbed multiple times with something sharp. It was clear that they had died several hours earlier as their bodies were cold and stiff. The woman screamed and ran out into the street, telling her husband everything, and he immediately called the police and emergency services. Authorities arrived at the scene at 7:50 a.m. Ilfira began experiencing heart problems and required medical attention herself. She was unable to answer questions clearly, crying and screaming, unable to believe that her daughter was no longer alive. By that time, relatives of the young couple had arrived at the house and neighbors began gathering at the sound of the commotion. Forensic experts found over a dozen stab wounds on the bodies of Alsu and Sabrina, inflicted by a knife and scissors. However, the murder weapons were not found in the house. The main suspect immediately became Timur, as he was nowhere to be found, and his phone was unreachable. However, his relatives quickly defended him, insisting that he couldn't have committed such a crime. All witnesses, including family and locals, unanimously stated that Timur was a loving and devoted husband who practically carried his wife on his hands. According to loved ones, the couple never even argued, and if they did have disagreements, Timur would never have raised his hand against someone he cherished more than anything. Yet soon, a few neighbors came forward, claiming that Timur was actually a hidden abuser. They said that he was extremely jealous of his beautiful wife, often having private arguments, and that their fights were sometimes even heard by others. Also had felt guilty because of her illness, and Timur allegedly told her that no one else would care for her but him. The evening before the tragedy, Timur and his friends stayed up late at their house. It was a Saturday, and they had been drinking with no particular rush to leave. When Timur went to see off the guests, it was already past midnight, and he disappeared for almost an hour and a half. During that time, Alsu texted her friend Anna, saying she was very worried about her husband and couldn't reach him, as he had left his phone behind. At 2 a.m., Alsu sent her friend a final message, saying that Timur had returned, everything was fine, and they were going to bed. She thanked Anna for her concern and sent a smiley. There was nothing in those messages that seemed alarming. On the contrary, everything appeared to be perfectly fine. Investigators speculated that Timur may have become jealous of someone Alsu had been in contact with, and upon returning, he had a heated argument. Since he had been drinking that evening, it was possible that he lost control of his emotions and grabbed a knife. Realizing what he had done, he likely fled the scene in his car, and now the authorities had to track him down to determine all the circumstances surrounding the incident. On January 23rd, it was reported that along the road towards Elabuga, in the parking lot of a small roadside cafe, a Lada Priora vehicle was found. Inside, the body of a young man was discovered. He had died from a gunshot wound to the chin. The weapon, a rifle, was found in his hands, and it seemed clear that he had taken his own life. The identity of the deceased was quickly confirmed. He was 25-year-old Timur Prokhorov, who had been wanted for questioning in connection with a double homicide. It was later revealed that the rifle belonged to Timur's father and had been kept in a secure safe in the home where Timur lived with his wife. It appeared that Timur had taken the weapon with him when he left that night, likely already knowing that he intended to end his life. Authorities seized footage from a security camera located on a building across from the Prokhorov residence. The video showed Timur leaving the house with friends. About an hour and a half later, he returned alone. However, he did not appear in the camera's view after that. It is important to note that the camera was focused on the street, so it was possible that Timur left and drove in the opposite direction, out of sight of the lens. One of the witnesses recalled that on the night of January 23rd, a local club was hosting a dance event. The club was located near the Prokhorov house, but the newlyweds did not attend, as they had guests over. At one point, an unfamiliar car drove up to their house, but soon left. The following morning, after news of the tragedy spread, 2 young men came looking for Timur. Upon learning of what had happened, they quickly left. No one was able to describe them afterward. As the investigation continued, a 47-year-old massage therapist from Neighborezny Chelny surfaced in the case. It was later revealed that she also provided intimate services at her home. Her name was kept out of the media, but it was alleged that Timur had visited her on several occasions. On the night of the tragedy, he texted her, asking if she could come over for a session. The woman was not surprised by the late-hour message and responded that she would be waiting for him. According to some reports, Timur visited the massage therapist after he had already committed the crime against his wife and her friend. They had an intimate encounter, but when the woman asked him to pay for the service, Timur refused. She threatened to report the incident, but instead of backing down, he became angry, insulted her, and hit her several times before leaving. The woman later went to the police, filing a report about the physical assault and claiming that Timur had also sexually assaulted her. However, for reasons that remain unclear, she later withdrew her statement. There were rumors that Prokhorov's relatives, who were well connected, including within law enforcement, had managed to settle the matter. They allegedly ensured that the massage therapist's identity remained a secret, and she never spoke again about her connection to Timur, nor about the abuse she had suffered at his hands. There were speculations that Timur had visited the massage therapist before the incident. This could potentially explain his long absence that night. After returning home, an argument about jealousy might have ensued between him and his wife. Sabrina, most likely siding with a relative, may have escalated the situation, causing the enraged man to grab a knife and commit the crime against both women. It is worth noting that at 7:03 a.m. on January 23rd, the young man logged into his social media account for the last time. After that, he stopped responding to calls and messages. This time was later considered the approximate time of his death. The theories involving infidelity, jealousy, and sudden rage seemed out of character for Timur, based on how those around him described him. Even Alsa's relatives refused to believe in any of these theories, instead asserting that the crime was committed by an outsider. Those who knew Timur described him as kind, calm, thoughtful, and balanced. His brutal actions did not fit this image. Timur might have occasionally had a drink on his days off or during holidays, but no one ever saw him intoxicated. However, during a search of the house, a significant quantity of prescription painkillers previously prescribed to Timur's cancer-stricken mother was found. After her death, many strong medications were still left in the house, which, it appeared, someone continued to take periodically. They had not been disposed of and were carefully stored in a separate drawer. This new information gave rise to another theory. Timur may have been using these medications in secret. On that fateful night, he might have taken a large dose, mixing it with strong alcohol, potentially leading to hallucinations or a sudden outburst of anger. If this were the case, the crimes might have been committed while he was in an altered state of mind. Once he came to his senses and realized what he had done, he may have seen no other option but to end his own life as well. No criminal case was filed due to the death of the individual believed to have committed the crime, but the relatives of the deceased couple could not accept that Timur was the one responsible for such a brutal act. On the insistence of Alsa's mother, the young couple was buried in the same grave at the local cemetery. The mother claimed that her son-in-law would never have harmed her daughter because he loved her deeply and that they should not be separated even in death. News of the double tragedy spread quickly throughout the quiet village, sending shockwaves across the entire Republic of Tatarstan. Journalists from all over the region flocked to the town, eager to cover the sensational story. However, the Prokhorov and Sabashnikov families avoided speaking to the press. On the other hand, villagers, many of whom didn't even know the deceased, were eager to give interviews, often recounting bizarre rumors and gossip. As a result, the case became clouded with fabricated details, many of which were far from the truth. On January 26th, Timur's father gave an interview where he revealed that the autopsy had found signs of physical abuse on his son's body and that there was very little blood in the car, suggesting that Timur may have been beaten and shot elsewhere before his body was placed in the car. However, the following day, investigators officially refuted the elder Prokhorov's statements, confirming that there were no injuries to his son's body except for the gunshot wound. The bullet was shot under the chin at a specific angle, which pointed to the likelihood that Timur had taken his own life. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.